In 1849, a young British archaeologist named Austen Henry Layard was digging through the ruins of ancient Nineveh in what is now northern Iraq. He wasn't looking for anything specific. He was simply digging. 12 feet below the surface, he found a room, a library. Thousands of clay tablets stacked in careful rows, covered floor to ceiling in a script nobody on earth could read. The tablets were not scattered. They were not buried by accident. They were organized, sorted, preserved with intention by people who clearly understood the value of what was written on them. Layard spent weeks carefully extracting them, each one wrapped, each one numbered, each one shipped back to the British Museum in London, where they sat in storage for years, waiting for someone who could unlock what they said. The script carved into them was called Cuneiform, one of the oldest writing systems ever discovered. Tiny wedge-shaped marks pressed into wet clay, then baked hard in the sun, a language that had not been spoken for 2,000 years. It took scholars 23 years to translate them, and when the translations finally came, in 1872, the academic world went completely silent because one of those tablets, tablet number 11 of a series now called the Epic of Gilgamesh, described a global catastrophe, a flood that covered every mountain on Earth. A single man, warned by a god, who built a massive wooden vessel and filled it with animals to save them from the rising waters. The story was identical, detail for detail, to the story of Noah's Ark, except this tablet was written 1,500 years before the book of Genesis existed.
This was not a copy of the Bible. The Bible was a copy of this. The scholar who made the translation, a man named George Smith, was so overwhelmed by what he had found that eyewitnesses in the British Museum reported he stood up from his desk, began pacing the room, and started removing his clothes in a state of pure shock. He had just discovered that the foundational story of Western religion had been told before, long before, by a civilization that most people in 1872 had never heard of, the Sumerians. And the flood story was not even the most disturbing thing written on those tablets. It was not even close. To understand why this discovery shattered everything historians thought they knew, you need to understand what the Sumerians actually were, and more importantly, what they were not. 6,000 years ago, in the flat, marshy land between two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, in what is now southern Iraq, something happened that has never been adequately explained by mainstream archaeology. A civilization appeared. Not slowly, not in the way civilizations are supposed to emerge over thousands of years of gradual development, from simple tools to agriculture, from small settlements to organized cities. The Sumerians did not follow that pattern. They skipped it entirely. Within what archaeologists estimate to be 1 or 2 generations, the Sumerians had a fully developed writing system, complex mathematical notation, astronomical charts precise enough to accurately track the movements of planets across decades, legal codes governing property, trade, marriage, and inheritance, agricultural irrigation systems feeding hundreds of thousands of people, monumental stone architecture, schools where children were taught to read and write, trade networks extending thousands of miles in every direction, all of it at once, from nothing. Archaeologists and historians have a term for this anomaly. They call it the Sumerian problem, because in every other case of civilization development in human history, in Egypt, in China, in the Indus Valley, in Mesoamerica,
there is always a visible primitive phase, a long, slow period of trial and error, simple tools giving way to complex ones, small villages growing into towns, towns growing into cities over centuries. With the Sumerians, there is no primitive phase. The archaeological record shows a period of very basic settlement, and then, almost immediately, a fully functioning civilization of extraordinary sophistication. It appeared in a single historical moment, and the Sumerians themselves had a very specific explanation for how this happened. They left it in writing, thousands of clay tablets, pressed and baked and preserved for 6,000 years, describing in careful bureaucratic detail exactly who gave them their knowledge, exactly where those beings came from, and exactly what those beings wanted in return. The explanation they offered was not modest. It did not involve gradual learning. It did not involve human ingenuity slowly developing over generations. The Sumerians wrote with complete matter-of-fact certainty that their civilization was given to them by beings who descended from the sky. They called these beings the Anunnaki. In the Sumerian language, the word translates most directly as those who from the heavens came to earth. And what the Sumerians wrote about the Anunnaki across thousands of tablets over thousands of years is not what you would expect from a primitive people inventing mythology to explain thunder and lightning. It is something far more specific, far more detailed, and, in several respects, far more disturbing. Now, mainstream archaeology has a standard explanation for the Anunnaki. They were mythology, religious symbolism created by a superstitious people who did not yet understand the natural world and invented powerful beings to explain what they could not comprehend. This is the official academic position, and it is a reasonable position until you read the actual tablets. Because the Sumerians were not a poetic people when it came to record keeping. They were obsessive administrators. Their clay tablets documented grain inventories down to the individual measure, tax records, listing exactly what every farmer in every district owed to the city. Legal disputes argued and settled with the precision of a modern courtroom. Astronomical observations recorded night after night for decades with the consistency of a modern scientific journal. When the Sumerians wrote about the Anunnaki, they used the same tone, the same language, the same dry, precise, matter-of-fact administrative style they used to record how much barley was stored in a particular warehouse on a particular day. They did not write about the Anunnaki the way the ancient Greeks wrote about Zeus, in sweeping, poetic verse, full of metaphor and drama. They wrote about the Anunnaki the way a government clerk writes a report. The specific text that first forced modern scholars to confront this problem is called the Atrahasis Epic. It is one of the most complete ancient texts ever recovered, assembled from multiple tablet fragments found across different sites. It tells a sequential story with a beginning, a middle, and an end in the kind of structured narrative that suggests it was not invented around a fire, but recorded from a much older source. The Atrahasis begins with a description of conditions on Earth before humans existed. The Anunnaki, it says, had arrived on Earth and assigned a lower class of their own people, called the Igigi, to perform heavy physical labor, digging canals, mining minerals from the ground, managing the land. The text says this continued for what it describes as 40 periods. Then, the Igigi rebelled. The tablet uses specific language to describe this rebellion. The Igigi, it says, set fire to their tools. They marched to the house of the chief Anunnaki leader, a being named Enlil, and surrounded it in the night, shouting. Enlil called an emergency council. The council faced a practical problem.
The work still needed to be done. The mining still needed to continue. The canals still needed to be maintained. Enki, described consistently across Sumerian texts as the chief scientist and genetic specialist among the Anunnaki, proposed a solution. He would create a new being, a primitive worker.
One intelligent enough to follow instructions, strong enough to perform physical labor, but fundamentally limited, designed from the beginning to serve a specific purpose and nothing more. The text describes the Anunnaki method Enki used. He combined with the tablets call the essence of the Anunnaki with the biological material of the most advanced existing creature on Earth. The word used in Sumerian for this new creation is Lulu. It translates as the mixed one. 14 surrogate mothers were used in the process, according to the text, and the result was the first humans. Now, read that again slowly. A labor shortage, a rebellion by workers, an emergency council, a genetic engineering solution, surrogate mothers, a hybrid species created specifically to perform work that the original inhabitants no longer wanted to do. The language in the Atrahasis is not poetic, it is procedural, and it is 6,000 years old. The Atrahasis Epic does not end with the creation of humanity. It continues, and what comes next is the part that no mainstream historian can fully explain away. Because after describing the creation of humans as a labor force, the text describes a problem that develops over time. Humanity, the text says, had become too numerous, too loud. The noise of humans, it says, disturbed the sleep of Enlil. For centuries, scholars read this as obvious mythology, a god annoyed by noise, clearly symbolic. But consider a different interpretation, a population that has grown beyond what the available resources can sustain, a workforce that has expanded beyond its original purpose, a created species that is beginning to develop in ways its creators did not intend. Enlil's solution was methodical. First, plague. The text describes a targeted disease sent to reduce human population. It worked temporarily, but humans survived. Second, drought. The Anunnaki withheld rain, causing widespread famine across the land. Humans survived again. Third, the flood. A final, absolute solution, one that would cover everything, kill everything, reset everything. Enlil issued one specific command before the flood was initiated. No human was to be warned. No human was to survive. But Enki, the one who had created humanity in the first place, broke that command.
He chose one man in the Atrahasis. That man's name is Atrahasis himself, meaning the exceedingly wise. In the Babylonian version of the same story, written centuries later, he is called Utnapishtim. In the Hebrew version, he is called Noah. Enki told this one man to build a vessel, to bring animals aboard, to seal the doors. The flood came. The Atrahasis says it lasted 7 days and 7 nights. The waters rose until every mountain was submerged. Every living thing outside the vessel died. When the waters finally receded, Enlil discovered what Enki had done. He was furious. In the text, and this detail is almost never discussed in popular accounts, the two brothers argue directly. Enlil confronts Enki for defying the council's decision. Enki defends his choice. It reads like a disagreement between two people, not like a myth, not like a religious allegory.
Like a recorded argument between two individuals who had a genuine conflict about a decision that affected millions of lives. And now, Consider this: the flood story does not appear only in Sumerian texts. It appears in over 500 independent cultures across every inhabited continent on Earth. The ancient Hindus recorded it in the Matsya Purana. A man named Manu, warned by a god, who built a great boat and survived a flood that covered the world. The ancient Greeks recorded it. Deucalion, warned by Zeus, who survived in a great chest while the world was submerged. The Mayans recorded it. The Chinese recorded it. Indigenous cultures across Africa, Australia, and the Americas recorded it. Over 500 versions, all describing the same event, all describing a single survivor warned in advance by a divine being. 500 cultures, zero contact with each other, the same story. There are only two explanations for this. Either 500 separate civilizations independently invented the exact same myth with the exact same structure and the exact same outcome, or something actually happened. There is one more Sumerian document that archaeologists rarely discuss in public lectures, not because it is obscure. It is displayed in a museum in Oxford, England, where anyone can walk in and see it. They rarely discuss it because there is no comfortable academic explanation for what it says. It is called the Sumerian King List. It is exactly what it sounds like, a sequential record of rulers who governed the cities of ancient Sumer, listed in order with the length of each king's reign recorded precisely beside their name. The later portions of the king list are non-remarkable. Kings who ruled for decades, cities that rose and fell in patterns consistent with everything else we know about ancient history. But the early portion of the king list is different. The first 8 kings listed, the rulers of Sumer before what the document itself calls the Great Flood, are recorded with reign lengths that do not fit inside any normal human understanding of time. The first king listed is a ruler named Alulim of the city of Eridu. His reign recorded 28,800 years. His successor reigned for 36,000 years. The pattern continues across all 8 pre-flood kings. Total combined reign of the 8 kings before the flood, 241,200 years. Mainstream historians have a standard response to this. The numbers are symbolic. Ancient cultures used large numbers to convey divine status and importance. These are not meant to be taken literally. This is a reasonable explanation. But here is the detail that makes it impossible to dismiss entirely. The cities listed in the pre-flood section of the king list were for centuries considered mythological inventions. Eridu, the first city listed, the city of the first king, was considered fiction until 1946, when a team of archaeologists excavated a site in southern Iraq and found it. Eridu is real. It is the oldest city ever discovered on Earth, carbon dated to approximately 5400 BCE. Shuruppak, listed in the king list, excavated, real. Bad Tabira, listed in the king list, located, real. Sippar, listed in the king list, excavated, real. Lagash, listed in the king list, excavated, real. Every city in the Sumerian king list that was once dismissed as mythology has been found in the physical landscape of southern Iraq. Every single one, which places historians in an extremely uncomfortable position. If the cities are real, historically verified, physically located, carbon dated, then the document recording them is not pure mythology. It is a historical record. And if it is a historical record, what do we do with the reign lengths? What do we do with 241,000 years of recorded human governance before a flood that the document says reset everything? There is no comfortable answer. So mainstream archaeology does what mainstream archaeology always does with uncomfortable questions. It moves on to the next topic and leaves this one open. In 1994, a geologist named Juris Zarins published research that should have changed everything we think we know about the origins of human civilization. It did not make the front pages. It was not discussed in mainstream media. It appeared in a scientific journal, was noted by a small number of specialists, and then quietly disappeared from public conversation. What Zarins found was this. During the last ice age, which ended approximately 12,000 years ago, global sea levels were dramatically lower than they are today. In some regions, the difference was more than 100 meters. The Persian Gulf, which today is a shallow body of water separating the Arabian Peninsula from Iran, did not exist in its current form during the Ice Age. The floor of the Persian Gulf was dry land, and it was not empty land. Using satellite imaging, sonar mapping, and geological core sampling, Zarins identified a massive river system running across what is now the Gulf floor. 4 rivers fed into it, rivers that still exist today and are named in ancient texts: the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Karun, and a 4th river, now dry, running through what is now Saudi Arabia, which Zarins identified as the ancient river called the Pishon, a river named specifically in the Book of Genesis as one of the 4 rivers of Eden. The combined river system ran southeast across the Gulf floor and emptied into the Arabian Sea near what is now the Strait of Hormuz. At the peak of the last ice age, this river valley would have been one of the most hospitable environments on Earth, protected on 3 sides by high ground, fresh water from 4 major rivers, moderate climate, rich in vegetation and wildlife. The kind of place where a population could grow and develop over thousands of years in relative isolation and comfort. Beginning approximately 8,000 years ago, as the last ice age ended and global temperatures rose, sea levels began climbing. The Persian Gulf began to fill, slowly at first, then faster. Zarins estimates that at certain points during the inundation, sea levels were rising fast enough that the shoreline moved inland by several meters per year, not per century, per year. Entire communities would have watched the water advance towards them across land their families had lived on for generations. They would have been forced to move north and northwest, following the rivers upward to higher ground, carrying everything they had, their knowledge, their systems, their records, their memory of the world that was disappearing behind them. They would have arrived in the flat land of what is now southern Iraq somewhere between 7,000 and 6,000 years ago. And within 1 or 2 generations, according to the archaeological record, the Sumerian civilization appeared fully formed, with writing, with mathematics, with astronomy, with legal codes, with the memory of a world that no longer existed, a world now sitting under 30 meters of salt water in the Persian Gulf, and with stories. Stories of a flood that had taken everything. Stories of the world before the water came. Stories of beings who had lived among them in that lost world, who had given them their knowledge, who had warned one man to build a vessel before the water arrived. Stories that they pressed into clay tablets and baked in the sun so that they would last forever, so that the world that came after would not forget what had come before. Zarins submitted his research, published his findings, made his evidence available. The funding for an underwater archaeological survey of the Persian Gulf has never been approved. The ruins, if they exist, are still there, 30 meters down, in the dark, waiting. There are currently 400,000 Sumerian cuneiform tablets stored in museums and university collections around the world. The British Museum alone holds 130,000 of them. Less than 10% have been fully translated and published. The reason is not conspiracy. The reason is simpler and in some ways more disturbing. There are not enough scholars in the world who can read ancient cuneiform to process them. The field of Assyriology, the academic discipline dedicated to translating these texts, has fewer than 1,000 active practitioners worldwide. 1,000 people for 400,000 tablets. At current rates of translation, it will take centuries to read them all. In the basements of the world's most prestigious institutions, in acid-free boxes, in temperature-controlled vaults, in carefully numbered archive drawers, sit tens of thousands of clay tablets from the oldest civilization on Earth, and we do not know what they say. We know that the flood story predates the Bible by 1,500 years. We know that the Sumerian king list accurately names cities that were later physically excavated and verified. We know that a geologist using satellite imaging and sonar has identified a drowned river valley on the floor of the Persian Gulf that matches in precise geographical detail the description of Eden in the Book of Genesis. We know that a civilization appeared in southern Iraq 6,000 years ago, without visible primitive phase, fully formed, fully functional, with a complete explanation of where their knowledge came from that mainstream archaeology has never satisfactorily answered. We know all of this. And we are still not looking at the bottom of the Persian Gulf. We are still not funding the translation of the remaining 90%. We are still calling it mythology. The question is not whether the Sumerians were telling the truth. The question is why we are so determined not to find out. The archive does not close. It only gets deeper. Subscribe to Hist Discover. The next file has already been opened.